Welcome to More Than a Conversation, the podcast where we meet and have discussions with some of the most interesting people and innovative leaders in their fields from all walks of life. We will be discussing everything from politics to theology to religion to philosophy to life. Every once in a while, I may just be on here talking about whatever's in the news and whatever I think will be of interest to you. This is your host, Patrick Connolly, and I hope that today will be more than a conversation for you. Welcome to More Than a Conversation. I am joined today by a special guest that you guys are going to love. You're going to have a great time. I am joined by none other than Eric Muldrow of Code Red Conversations. Eric, it is so good to have you on with me today. Thank you for joining me.
I appreciate it, brother. Appreciate you for having me on.
Man, when I saw you, I was like, I've got to talk to him. And just in the moments prior to us going live, we were already having good conversation. I was like, man, I got to get this thing going live because I didn't want to do the podcast before everybody else got to hear it. So it's exciting to have you here. Eric, when I ran into you, when I first heard you, you were actually doing a conversation with Southern Evangelical Seminary. You guys were talking a little bit about woke culture and those things. And there's something that makes you uniquely able to talk about those things. And that is the career you had prior to what you're doing now. You served in law enforcement, and you've got some views on that I cannot wait to hear. And we're going to talk about all those things. But before we get into that, we always have a segment that we talk about. We talk about the origin story, kind of like in Marvel. You've got the origin story. So what's the origin story?
I'm a huge Marvel fan, so don't get me started over here.
There we go. There we go. So what is the origin story of Eric Muldrow?
Wow. Hey, I appreciate it. Once again, man, I appreciate you having me on. Man, I'm a 70s kid, man. I'm a 70s and 80s kid. I grew up in New Jersey, and as shocking as it may be for a lot of people when I tell them that I'm born in 1970, I dealt with a lot of racism growing up, a lot. And I remember having negative contacts with the police. I remember a police officer stopping me and my brothers and basically telling us that you were in the wrong blanking. You can fill in the proper expletive cuss word, begins with the letter F. So I'll let your imaginations run wild on that one. Probably not too wild, but you get it. And that we needed to go back from where we came from. And we were in a predominantly, we lived in a predominantly white neighborhood. So it was not common. It was not uncommon for us to hear someone yelling the N-word, driving by, screaming it out to us. And some of my so-called friends in school mocking us and dropping the N-word and telling black jokes and stuff like that. So racism was an actual part of our daily lives. So in early 1984, my dad picked us up and moved us to South Carolina. That's where he was from. So we get to South Carolina, and it's a total opposite. I'm in a predominantly black neighborhood, and now I'm getting harassment from other black kids because I have this thick New Jersey accent, and I just acted differently. I just wasn't raised in that same environment. I wasn't trying to chase after every female that was around. So we got a lot of heat coming from a lot of black folks. So basically, my perspective is, and I know people like to spin and manipulate and use racism and attempt to redefine words, especially in this current woke culture. But racism, to me, I still hold to the traditional opinion of the traditional definition of racism. So I dealt with racism all of my life, and I got hated on for being too dark from other black kids. I got hated on for being black from other white kids. I got the crap from all sides. But I always had a passion growing up watching TV shows. I mean, like I said, I'm a 70s kid, so I watched Starsky and Hutch, TJ Hooker, Chips. I always loved the idea of being a police officer. Always loved that idea. And it didn't really sink into me that I knew I wanted to be a cop for sure until I saw the movie Lethal Weapon with Mel Gibson, one of my all-time favorite actors. When I saw that movie Lethal Weapon, I said, I want to be a cop. I didn't get to become a cop right away. I joined the Army. Did 4 years as an Army. I'm a Desert Storm vet. was a medic in the Army. And then after I got out, my law enforcement career began. I started working for Westville Correctional Center, a maximum security prison at that time in Westville, Indiana. And that's when I first came in deep contact with people from a totally different world perspective, deep gang culture. You have to understand, Westville is about 40 miles outside of Gary, Indiana, and about an hour outside of Chicago. And you're talking about two high crime, high gang environments. And I was 22 years old, fresh out of the Army, like I said. So I had a trial by fire, as they say. They threw me deep into the deep end, working the maximum security section. And it was rough going at first, but then I kind of found my groove. I started learning how to navigate in that environment. I think I excelled. I think I did pretty dang good. In 95, I decided to move to Las Vegas. I had a brother out here, and I started working. And a year later, I started working for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department in the Clark County Detention Center, which is the county jail here. And I did that for 10 years. And in 2006, I really decided I just wanted to make some changes. So I just applied to make a transfer out to the patrol side of the house and became a police officer. And throughout the course of that, I was a active shooter response instructor. I was a defensive tactics instructor. I was a firearms instructor. I was a critical CIT officer, which is like critical incident, dealing with suspects and citizens who are in a mental health crisis. And man, I worked and I loved what I did. And in 2014, I decided to retire. So that's basically the gist of my upbringing and what brought us to the point to where I'm speaking to you right now.
That's quite a story, man. And there's a lot of stuff that I want to go unpack in there.
No problem, brother.
You mentioned kind of having like some different values when you moved down to the South. And I'm here in South Carolina. And you talked about you came down and you had that New Jersey accent, but you mentioned you had some different values. Where did that value system come from that was different? You were talking about other people were chasing the girls, so on and so. Like, where did your values, why were your values different?
Oh, I would say it was a different culture. And it's weird. We were raised in a Christian home, but it wasn't as if my parents were trying to live that Christian life consistently all the time. And we all know, as we struggle as Christians, as Christian men and women, we wrestle with sin. And my dad really struggled, but he struggled. He had like a whole other life going on. But my mom really raised us watching a lot of the old school televangelists on TV. Now, despite the theology, many of their theology being jacked up, she still established some biblical foundations of how to treat each other and had us memorizing scripture at a young age. And I think that those aspects, and plus the environment we were around, it wasn't, I mean, guys, the young men were getting, were digging chicks, and I love girls just like anybody else as a young man. But as far as just being out there, just being the promiscuity, it just wasn't a part of the environment that I grew up in New Jersey. But it was a total 180. To see a young girl walk around pregnant in New Jersey in the early 80s was an anomaly. It was a very rare occurrence. But when when we moved to South Carolina, it was a total opposite. It was a regular thing, a routine thing to see a teenage girl, oftentimes, typically young Black girls, pregnant. And I'm talking about 14, 15, 13, 16 years old. That was a almost regular thing. So, and I think, and I'm not, and I know that there's a lot of people raised with a biblical perspective and foundation at that time, but I just think that where we were living in New Jersey, there's a lot of Roman Catholics, a lot of deeply Jewish culture, and I think a lot of those things were frowned upon, and so it definitely displayed in how they lived. Or if anything like that was going on, it was under the surface.
When you started recognizing culture around you having issues, something in you goes, hey, I'm going to go into this law enforcement career or whatever. So
right.
Was that when you went to the first prison or jail that you worked at there in Indiana, I believe you said,
Yeah,
Like when
prison.
what was your thought process going into that? Was it a job? Were you trying to make a difference? I mean, was it one of those ideological things? Was it what made you say, I want to go be locked up with criminals all day long?
Yeah, honestly, I wanted to be the test to become a police officer, but we're living in a relatively smaller town, Michigan City, Indiana, and there wasn't a whole lot of opportunities as far as to get on the force. You basically had to know someone, and if you knew someone, you had to apply at the right time because testing was few and far between. So I had at that time my ex-wife now. She had some family members who worked at the prison. I knew I had interest in getting involved in law enforcement. So I said, well, this might give me some experience that can help me in the long term. So I was trying to be a little proactive. The last thing I thought about doing was working in a prison or a jail. I had no desire whatsoever to do anything like that. But in the long term, when I look back on my career, those are some of the most foundational periods of my law enforcement career. And I would even go so far as to say my life, because I learned so much about human nature. I learned so much about the criminal mindset. And I think that, and communication, and being able to properly communicate with someone who does not agree with you and who sees things completely different than you do, but being able to find common ground and being able to de-escalate matters. I think the time as a corrections officer was the most valuable time of my entire career. No question about it.
Speaking of the value of your time as a correctional officer and having to de-escalate situations and so on and so forth, I know it is often typical, particularly for sheriff's departments, because usually they are in charge of corrections, at least on a county level. It's often typical for them to require officers to spend some time inside the jail before going out. And I don't know if that was a requirement like when you went out to Clark County or not. But sometimes that is a requirement. And I've often heard law enforcement officers talk about how that was formative. Do you think an officer who has spent time inside a jail or prison for a year, 2 years, whatever amount of time that is that's required, does that put them in a better position to operate on the street, or is the advantage just not, does it not really matter? What do you think about that?
I would say if I had the power to impact all county police agencies, I would try to have the vast majority of people have background, gain experience working in that environment. Like I said, when it comes down to learning how to de-escalate, because you don't have the same tools. In the jail, in the prison system, you might have pepper spray. When I worked in the prison, we had handcuffs, a radio, and in the county jail, we had handcuffs, a radio, and pepper spray. That's it. And you're talking about one officer to, it could be 40 inmates. It could be all the way up to 120. One officer dealing with 120 inmates. So you have to gain, if you want to do your job well, you have to acquire the ability to communicate without escalating to trying to start a fight.
Yeah. So how do you do, like when you're in that situation, all right, and you're locked up, there's no escape for you either. I mean, there's not a quick way out for you in those moments. And so you're literally locked in a cage, for lack of a better word, with a group of people who have already committed crimes, a range of crimes. They're still human beings, but a range of crimes. And something happens, something's going on where you're trying to tell somebody what to do. They don't want to do what you're telling, or somebody's, stepping out of policy and you got to get that under control. Oh, how do you do that? Like what grounds? I mean, on the street, obviously you mentioned tools. We see a lot of things escalate quickly, it seems like, or some would say things escalate too quickly. Some would say they don't escalate quickly enough, whatever. The idea of reliance on a handgun, but you didn't have those things. So in those moments, how do you do that, man? How do you deal with 15, 20, 50 people who have to listen to you, or you're trying to maintain control? How does that work?
Yeah, it depends on the situation. Now, there definitely can come a time where you have to, as I like to say, lay hands on somebody. There are plenty of times where you had to get down. But the vast majority of times, you have to be able to just communicate. If someone violates a policy or breaks a law or gets into a fight, you have backup, and backup may be seconds away, because it could be officers who are transporting inmates from one housing section to another. That's their primary function for the day. So you have backup coming, people on lunch break. So officers will be there to help you out. But first and foremost is your ability to be able to persuade. That's the most important thing. Can you communicate? Can you get them to comply? Can you get a suicidal man or woman to get off the balcony or not hang themselves? Or if they manage to break some things in their cell and now they have a homemade weapon, a shank, as they call it, like a knife, how do you get them to put those weapons down without necessarily having to escalate to that? Now, we have tools. If you have someone who is just non-compliant, they're ready to fight, or if you have like a riot situation, we had units who were set up and trained to deal with those. We call them the CERT team, Special Emergency Reaction Team. It's kind of like the prison or jail, the corrections version of a SWAT team. They have additional training, additional skill set. So you do have that if necessary, but they're rarely ever utilized, rarely ever deployed. And first and foremost is just you as the individual officer. How can you get someone to chill the heck out so you can get things done, so you can maintain the normal operations on your unit without causing all kinds of chaos? And sadly, there are a lot of officers who have crappy, excuse the language, ability to communicate. They're terrible at it. Their job is they rile people up. And you can do that if you want to, make your career tough and hard, or you can just say, hey, you figure out what's motivating this guy. You actually pay attention to the guys in your housing unit. You learn a little bit about them. You talk to them because they're normal people. Yeah, they made some bad choices. Their sin, their struggles may be different than mine. I didn't struggle with drugs or alcohol or stealing or robbing, even though I tried doing a little life of crime when I was a teenager, but then I got caught when I was like 13. My mom threatened to tell my dad. So that was all the threat I needed. My life of crime was over at an early age by the grace of God. But we all wrestle. We wrestle with different things. That person their hang up may be drugs, methamphetamines. This person over here may be caught up deeply in the gang culture, gang lifestyle, gang banging, everything that goes with it. So you learn who they are. You start talking to them. You find out that they're regular people, just like you, when it's all said and done. But yeah, at the same time, you have to understand that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of manipulation that goes on, especially in the prison environment. The jail, the turnover rate is extremely high in the jail. Most people are in there for less than a year. The vast majority of people are in there for a few days at a time. Pretrial detainees, people coming in there for minor traffic violations, warrants, things like that, in and out. But in the prison system, especially in the maximum security section, you have people who are looking at years. Some people are looking at decades in there. And if you want to survive in that environment, you have to, I would dare say, it's very rare the person who does not manipulate or get caught up in all the criminal element in a prison environment. Very, very rare. Matter of fact, I don't know anyone who out of all the inmates I met. Now, I never did a 100% survey,
Sure,
but I think to some degree everyone was involved in some of that. So long story short, man, it's a matter of understanding who you're dealing with, knowing that there are people just like you, yet at the same time not going to the point to where you start, I'm trying to think of the proper word here, where you start compromising your values, you start skirting the rules in order to make them happy. You have to find that balance. You have to be tough, but at the same time, you have to be fair, and you have to know when to give every now and then. So it's a tough balance. And it took me probably a good year to really find that, and then be able to start fine tuning those attributes that I gained to help make me a better corrections officer, because the vast majority of my corrections career was in the county jail. But I was thrown in at the deep end of the pool working in the maximum security prison. And that, man, I'm telling you, that just helped me out. Helped me so tremendously, so much, because just knowing how to flip that switch just knowing what to say at the right time. Man, I'm telling you, a lot of people love to talk about in law enforcement. They love to say how cops need to learn how to de-escalate better. Just most of the time, we don't see it. We see these short little news clips where officers beating some dude up, and that's what goes viral. But you didn't see the first 10, 15, 5 minutes that took place prior to that. So I think there's a lot of people have a big misunderstanding about cops' ability or inability to communicate.
And there's not a lot of viral videos out there of the other 38 calls that police officer's been on during that week where they have talked someone down. You know, where they've done those things. Now, when you walk
they're not as exciting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, nobody wants to watch that, right? So when you walk into the prison and you know, you're coming from this house, you're watching televangelists, you've moved a little bit, you've seen a couple different cultures, but there had to be a moment where you're like, I'm in prison right now. I'm in a different setting. This is not my people. This is not my background. This is not, I've seen some things like this, but I've never been surrounded like that. What kind of experience did you have, or were there any experiences early on where you just kind of had that Dorothy, we are not in Kansas anymore moment?
Oh yeah. And I can think of the main one. I was a new guy working. So you pretty much get the same amount of garbage from the COs that you do from the inmates to some degree. Probably a little, obviously not as bad, but you still get it. So I remember walking into the maximum security housing unit. It was GSC, General Services Complex was the name. And one of the COs yelled, "Fresh meat," you know, and then so I come walking in. One of the COs, not one of the inmates, one of the COs yells that. So then I see these two male inmates with Kool-Aid on their lips and like blue pencil, like colored pencils like over their eye, like eyeshadow. And they got their shirts all tied up, like, you know, like girls used to do back in the day. They'd bring it up and look like almost like it's like a bikini top or something like that. They're walking down the hallway like that. And they're looking at me and acting, and they're walking all feminine, and they are living as if they are women inside this prison setting. And they're looking at me like, you know, like they haven't seen, like they've been locked up for a long time, and they just get out and they see a KFC down the road and they're hungry. That's how they were looking at me. And they were just like, "Ooh, look at him." And they're just all doing all this kind of stuff. I laugh at it now, but dude, I'm telling you, when I first saw that freaked me out. And like nowadays it's everywhere, but we're talking 92, 93. I wasn't used to that. It wasn't out there. And the environment I grew up in, and it wasn't allowed in the military. So you didn't see that real flaming feminine gay person. And that's what let me know right then and there that, man, you were in a totally different world. And these guys, the male inmates, referred to these feminine acting inmates as she and her. They referred to them as women. That really woke me up and let me know I was in a totally different environment.
Wow. Yeah. You know, like you were saying, nowadays it is, that's a little bit more, well, it's not normal, but it's becoming more accepted in society. And now I get taken off of Facebook for saying not normal. But you know, what I think is almost humorous about that when you say that, it's as if the prison system had accepted woke ideology before the rest of us did, right?
It's funny because I was actually having that conversation. I was having that conversation in my head a few weeks ago. I said the things that there was something known as a down low brother. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. A few years ago, it was a guy who goes into the prison environment, gets caught up in the lifestyle. He might have, quote unquote, a chick on the side while he's in there. He hooks up with these these gay dudes while he's inside. But then when he gets out, he acts like it never happened and he lives a normal, straight life. Now, something like that happened all the time to a lot of people who had any length of time in prison. And it was something that was known within like certain aspects of the Black community. But now it's like you said, they embraced that a long time ago. But now it's the norm these days. And norm within, it's being pushed as normal within our society.
You being in the prison and you seeing these things up close, do you think that the system of incarceration that we have, are there times you see it work? Does it not work? I mean, are there changes that need to be made? I mean, you hear a lot of talk about the prison system, and probably one of the biggest things that I hear a lot, you hear a lot of people refer to our current prison system as, well, there was a book recently, The New Jim Crow. In fact, I think I've got it right here behind me that I read. I don't subscribe to the ideology behind most of what the author says, but a lot of things in there, they're do make you think. They do make you wonder, hey, how well is this working out? How much are we actually improving society with some of our prison systems? And I haven't been, as someone who's only had the opportunity to have conversations with people, but not been able to be on the inside, tell me what you think about that. I mean, is the prison system worthwhile? Does it need a major overhaul? What are your thoughts?
I think it's worthwhile, but it definitely needs a major overhaul. And I don't subscribe to a lot of the ideology of the new Jim Crow either. I think there are tremendous holes in their perspective when it comes down to law enforcement and the criminal justice system in general. But I've been a critic of the corrections system for decades because I haven't worked it. I see that typically what it does is it creates better prisoners, better criminals. That's typically what happens because the primary issue is that there is a lack of discipline that's allowed within those environments. You can only be so tough, especially in our current culture, because you see a lot of the restraints or a lot of the restraining factors. You'll see a lot of them being lifted to where they're trying to make it easier for inmates to get released even after committing violent crime. We saw that tremendously over this last year. It was insane the amount of violent criminals that were released back into our culture out of concerns for COVID, quote unquote. Nonsense. Because this was happening already in a lot of places, in particularly New York, California, Illinois, places like that, typically very left-leaning places, very liberal on crime. And they look at the corrections system as being a place just to oppress minorities, Black folks in particular, Black males. But having worked in that environment, I understand it better than probably 99% of the culture because I actually saw what went on in those environments. I think that it should be a place where controls are even higher than they currently are. And I think that it needs to be a place more disciplined on a daily basis, just in general, military style, not necessarily getting yelled and screamed at all day long, but just more structure when you get up, when you move, when you do different things. Because the crime rate, the violence rate is so high in a lot of corrections environments. And one of the main reasons is because a lot of these people have such freedoms and they can do a lot behind, and because of staffing, there are multiple factors. There's not just one factor. There are many factors involved, but I think one of the main things is inmates are allowed, there's too much idle time. And you put too many people together and on varying levels, you mentioned earlier, you get a guy who's in there he's a repeat offender, but he's primarily does a lot of petty crimes, but he still is a repeat offender. Eventually got to a point where he goes away for a lot longer. He may have to do prison time after a certain amount of time. And then he may have gotten into fights or something like that. So then he's put in more of a disciplinary housing unit. And then down the way from him could be a guy who was in there for something way more violent. Could be a murder, attempted murder, all types of high-level gun charges, various crimes. And they could be housed in the same unit. Or you could have a white-collar inmate who money laundering, various things like that, no violence whatsoever. He's housed with a dude who is violent, who has a violent history. So you have a constant lack of focus and drive. And there were too many times where the inmates, to some degree, below the surface ran some housing units, because you had officers who were weak and who didn't take charge, and they didn't promote themselves or display themselves as being the one in charge. There were some officers working in those environments are intimidated by these inmates, and they allow themselves to be manipulated. So I think control is the biggest thing that needs to be taken back by the officers. Education should be emphasized, and more rehabilitation. Now, as a Christian man, I'm thankful that there are many many ways in which the church can come in there with various Bible studies and things like that can definitely help rehabilitate. There've been demonstrations. I remember a few years ago, and maybe it's more than a few years ago, some years back, John Piper visited one church where the warden had taken over, and he was a Christian man, and he really started emphasizing Christ-centered rehabilitation. And it had a dramatic impact on that prison. Dramatic. As far as the level of violence that dropped, it was insane. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And it's almost next to impossible these days. So you need to find different ways. If you can't go that route for whatever reason, whether the states won't allow it, you need to find various ways in order to gain more control and teach them and educate them in rehabilitation, how to be better, how to be better prepared for the world, and what you can do when you get out so you don't get caught up all over again. Because recidivism, which is inmates coming in and out, back and forth over and over again, is a consistent problem. It'll always be there to some degree because some people just really don't want to change. They just got caught. And when they get out, they just plan on going back to doing what they did. But there are some people out there who just really struggle with how to change. They want to, they just don't know how. So I think there needs to be more controls, more ways as far as educating the inmates so that when they do leave, they're better prepared for life outside.
Now, you mentioned the idea that I brought it up about the new Jim Crow, and then you talked about how you don't really subscribe to that ideology. But is there a reality, and I think there is a reality, probably not even need to ask the question, but it does seem like there are a lot of black men who are in prison, who are in jail, who are incarcerated in some area. So as a guy who's been in there, what do you say to people who say, yeah, but Eric, look at the numbers, and the numbers say that men of color are disproportionately imprisoned. What do you say to that?
Now, I would agree that they're disproportionately in the prison system, but the question we have to ask is, we have to ask a deeper why. When we examine the numbers of violent crimes within that come from members, a small segment, and I want to emphasize that. We're talking about less than 1% of the black population, of the black male population, to go even deeper, who are committing these violent acts. But when you look at the homicide rate being multiple times higher than it is, and we're talking about amongst each other, I'm talking about whites killing whites, blacks killing blacks, Hispanics killing Hispanics, and other cultures as well. When you look at the murder, let's just look at the murder rate alone. The murder rate within the black community, black on black homicides, is multiple times higher than in any other culture, multiple times higher. When we look at the fact that blacks are committing over 50% of the homicides, over 40% of robberies and violent crime, while making up less than 12% or less than 13% of the population. If we go deeper, we understand that males commit the vast majority of crime within the country in general. Over 93% of the corrections inmate population in any setting, jail, prison, whether male or female, males make up over 93% of the prison population. When we dig deeper and we look at it, it's a small segment of that population who are committing all these violent crimes. Why are we shocked when we make up the vast majority of the prison system? And oftentimes people want to say, well, it's based on the history. That is a overflow, or it's a result of us being enslaved and mistreated for years and years, then we would have to look at the culture back closer to slavery days. And we would see that the vast majority of people, if we look at the 1920s, 1930s, when Jim Crow laws were still in effect, and we were only a short period outside of being freed as slaves, the crime rate within the Black community was dramatically lower than it is now. Wasn't even on the same page. So here we are now, you're talking about over 100 years later, and now we seem to be wrestling with these issues when it comes to crime more. Then you can't point your finger and say that it's because it's an after effect of slavery. That's just not being consistent. It is a weak argument. And we have to look at other aspects. What could it be? Could it be the fact that we are in a position now where a lot of young men are being raised in single parent homes where there's a lack of discipline from a solid father? Could that be a factor? Especially when we consider the fact that young men or young kids in general who are raised without a father are more likely to end up in prison, greater likelihood of dealing with mental health issues, greater likelihood of being involved in drugs, dropping out of school. Young women are more prone to get pregnant when the father isn't active and in the home. And then we look at the dramatic rate in which within the Black community, in which there's single parent homes, moms raising their kids by themselves. Could those other issues be a factor? Are we just going to blame everything on racism, or are we going to try to examine this thing as holistically as possible so we can make some improvements and we can truly examine ourselves and say, hey, let's start doing some things a little bit differently? But we're in the midst of this culture right now that refuses to examine any level of personal responsibility.
You know, you touched on something there with personal responsibility, and I'm actually going to write that down. We're going to come back and talk about that. But one of the things that you talked about children being raised in homes without a father and a lack of discipline. Mm-hmm. I think something that I have discovered, it's a working theory, and I'd like to hear it from somebody who was a former law enforcement officer, had a long career there, and now is speaking into the culture regarding the truth about these situations. I want to talk about that, Eric. I want to know, my theory is this. For a time, I worked in education. It wasn't my primary calling. It just so happened I ended up working in private education for a little while. It was a Christian school that had a few hundred students. It wasn't extremely large, but I noticed with some of my young people, particularly my young men, it seemed as if I was the first person. When I was the principal, I was the first man they'd ever run into, a few of them, who was telling them to do something they didn't want to do. It's like I was the first person. And I have a theory that a lot of what's happening when I watch these videos, and I've consumed countless hours of these videos that are out there over the years of interactions with police officers. And when I see all of these different interactions that go on, and I see all of these young men that have a run-in with the police where the police pull up and they're saying, hey, put your hands out the window, or hey, get out of the car, or even just simple things. Don't sit on that wall right there. Hey, you can't be at this part of the park. Whatever it might be. The first reaction is you're not going to tell me what to do, as opposed to the first reaction being a person in authority has told me something. And you go back to the idea of fatherlessness. And for me, I had a run-in with a grown man very early in my life who taught me there are consequences to not listening to authority. And that grown man was my father. And so I learned, you know what I mean? Like, I learned there's a consequence for not respecting authority. And those consequences varied as I grew, as I became but whatever level there was, my father was going to let me know. As a young man, you start testing your dad. You know how that goes sometimes, and he let me know he's going to be in charge here and he's the authority. And so that's in your mind. You understand that. But now we have young men who don't have that in their home. And suddenly the first person they run into is Officer Muldrow saying, hey, come here. Hey, I'm talking about the most innocuous stuff, man. I'm not talking about somebody showing up and violating somebody's rights. I'm talking about simple things. I'm the person who's entrusted with caring for this neighborhood, for this city, with whatever it's my job to protect. And I said, come here, I want to talk to you. I said, step out of the car. I said, give me your license. Just very small things. I see things escalate to the point that people either lose a career or lose a life over something that could have just stopped with the authority asked me something. So I'm asking you, like, is there anything to this working theory I've got that for some people, they've never been taught that lesson that when you run into authority, there's consequences, and suddenly they've never had to listen to anybody.
Absolutely. I started off talking about my short run as a criminal.
Hey, More Than a Conversation listeners, I hope that you are enjoying this conversation as much as I am, and I hope that you're getting something great out of it today. I'm just wanting to jump in here in the middle to take a moment and let you know a few ways that you can help out More Than a Conversation. First, wherever you're listening, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. That will definitely help, and that'll make sure that you get all the content. Also, if you have a way to rate, if your app allows you to give a 4-star, 5-star, whatever the rating is that's the top rating, I would so appreciate if you would go ahead and drop a rating there. That's how the aggregators and the distributors rank podcasts, and the higher the ranking you give, the more ears will be able to hear these great conversations. Thanks again, and I'm hoping that today has been more than a conversation for you. Now let's get back to it.
And what was the main factor that stopped me? Was the threat of my mom telling my dad, because I knew what would happen to me. Now, you can call it anecdotal all you want, but that was the game changer for me, because I knew that my dad, if he got a hold of me after doing that, he would have torn my behind up. And who knows, he might have taken me down to the jail for all I know. That's just the kind of guy he was. He said, if you ever end up locked up, don't call me, because I'm not going to come get you. Now, I know my mom would have came and tried to get me out of there, but my dad, when he said it, I believed it. And you talked about when you got older, you talk about trying your dad. There wasn't none of that going on in my house. None of us try. We might get a little mouthy on occasion, but he would shut that down real quick. And I lived most of my life with a healthy fear of my dad. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I think you're onto something right there. You mentioned healthy fear. What does the scripture teach? That the one who bears the sword does so that the wicked may fear. Yeah, and I talk about test. There were times where you get a little mouthy, you buck up a little bit. And my dad, even as a teenager, my dad's a small frame guy, ended up being a lot larger than my dad, but it didn't matter, man. Like I still had an understanding this is probably not going to ultimately might not work out well. And I think, you know what I'm saying? And so I think that healthy fear, that's godly. The fear of God,
the fear
is
of the Lord.
Beginning
what does
of wisdom.
say? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of wisdom. And you talk about roles. When it comes to roles within a household, the way Scripture, God meant it to be, was a one man, one woman for life. And when you start having these ideologies, these worldviews that try to move you away from that, these radical feminist movements and the sexual revolution, there's so many factors that played into our culture. Evolution, the promotion of evolution, more godless society. You're a product of time and chance acting on matter, and there is no purpose behind your existence whatsoever. You start marrying all these ideologies. And also, we can't discount the unfortunate reality of slavery within our society. We cannot discount that there are repercussions. But when you look at, man, I'm going through an amazing book. If I can recommend anyone read or check out any material, it is Red, White, and Black by Woodson. I can't think of his name, but his first name. But his book is titled Red, White, and Black. And it is a series of essays.
Is that Bob
written
Woodson?
by current Black. Robert Woodson, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I had the awesome
1776
pleasure. Yes. I had the awesome pleasure of sitting on that panel discussion with him. And I'm telling you that I was just I was talking to my family, and I was just saying, this is one of the most powerful books I've ever read in my life, because they use history. They don't deny, they don't shy away from the unfortunate history of slavery and the crazy laws, the Jim Crow laws, Black Code, all these different things that we had to deal with as Black folks here in our country. But the power to overcome was such a prevalent part of American history, Black history here in the United States. So when you have people constantly going back to these, pointing those out, you're doing such a disservice, because you're truly creating a massive victim culture. So when you have you couple that with everything else I mentioned, you have people who are destined and doomed almost to failure, because you have, once again, there's so many factors that are involved that are against them. Girl, you can do your own thing. You don't need no man. That's, what you hear in a lot of women talking. Or my mom was I was like, I get what you're trying to say, but I can't stand when I hear people say that, because your mom can only do the job of a mother. She's not a man. So she does not have those attributes to raise a young man or a young woman the way that a male role model, the father, would. She's just not wired that way. She's not designed by the Lord with that capacity. The way my wife and I deal with my daughter, primarily, she's still living in the house. I remember and we have a really weird story. We split up and we got back together. But when we got back together, I remember my daughter telling me that she wasn't excited about us getting back together. And she said the main reason was that she knew there were a lot of things that she can get away with her mom, that she couldn't get away with me. One, with my law enforcement background, I'll interrogate you in a heartbeat to a point where you really you're stumbling all over your words, because I'm trying to figure out the truth. And I know the questions to ask. And I was pretty dang good at it, if I can say so myself. So she knew that. But then long term, she said, Dad, you coming back in the house was the best thing that ever happened to me, or one of the best things, other than her coming to faith in Christ. She was like, that was like the best thing that happened to me, because you taught me so many different perspectives. You taught me so much. You taught me to be a critical thinker. You taught me to examine things differently, not to be, always all up in my emotions and my feelings, to be tough on occasion. And there's that balance between a husband and a wife that you're not going to get when just one of those parties are involved. And when you look at the Black community, getting back on, trying to make sure I stay on topic, when we examine the Black community and we see the single parent rate is around 75, 77%, why do we think that we're going to get out of this unscathed? That's not going to cause problems. The poverty rate, if things dramatically change once you get married. All these families, people having these studies talking about the poverty rate or the wealth gap between the Black community and the white community. You think being all these single parents, you think that doesn't play a role? One income coming in the household, that doesn't matter? Let's examine this stuff. Let's examine these things and stop trying to blame white folks for every problem we got in the Black community. Man, there's not a white dude lurking behind all your problems. A lot of times, man, we just have to look in the mirror, and I'm thankful that I was kind of instilled that mindset. Man, you got to look in the mirror sometimes. I remember there were times where I would do something stupid on the job, and then somebody would tell on me. And my first reaction would be, man, that dude told. But then I sit back and I'm like, you know what? Had you not done anything dumb, you wouldn't have to worry about anybody telling on you. That's your own fault. I'm glad that was instilled in me early on to take responsibility. And I got some of that from my parents growing up, but I would say mostly I got that from my time in the Army. And unfortunately, we have a culture right now that we mentioned it earlier, personal responsibility, like what's that? It's somebody else's fault. I'm tired of it personally.
Yeah, and for me, so growing up, I'll give you an example. I grew up near a place called Harper's Ferry, which is in West Virginia. During the Civil War, Harper's Ferry was in Virginia. It was a site of a guy named John Brown, who was an abolitionist. John Brown went to Harper's Ferry, tried to free the slaves. He ended up being hung actually a few miles from where my parents live right now. You can ride by and see the place where they hung him after they tried him for treason there in Charlestown.
What part of South Carolina are you in?
I live in South Carolina now, but I grew up in West Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., that area up there. So,
okay.
My mom actually works across the street from the courthouse where John Brown was tried. So a lot of history there. Wow. So coming up, to me, the idea of overcoming slavery, and I'm from the outside, and I understand that. I get that, I'm not a guy who had to live that experience, and I don't have the lived experience of being a man of color. But to me, like the most heroic story ever that I knew of, like the most heroic story in American history, maybe even more so than even the American Revolution, was the overcoming of the extreme odds of people who survived slavery. And then you see, and I got wrapped up in the Civil War and reading about all that happened after that, and that was, when I was a kid, I thought the most noble thing that ever had happened in the history of the world, in my mind, was those soldiers marching to free the slaves. That was a thing. And in fact, when I was a kid one time, just a side story, but when I was a kid, we went to a reenactment. And I had a little Union soldier hat on, and the whole part of the whole reenactment was there was a Confederate soldier that had been captured, and he escapes, and they're chasing him. And my mom wasn't paying attention for a moment. I'm like 6 years old. I get away from my mom. I'm running down the street trying to help them capture this guy. I was going to be a hero. I was into this, man. These were these people that enslaved people. That was my... And so then I read after the war, and I see suddenly there's black lawmakers, there's black success, all these things are happening. And I get there's a lot of things that went on. I get there was some bad things that happened. I get a lot of bad things that happened, but
of course.
Then you talk about, I look now and I hear a different narrative than what I thought I knew. And the narrative I thought I knew was the awesome story of overcoming. And now I'm almost hearing this idea that for the rest of time, I am an oppressor. My children will be oppressors, and you, Eric, are the person I'm oppressing. And,
right.
My whiteness is a thing that is terrible and oppressive and cannot be fixed. And your blackness is a thing that is weak and is oppressed and will always be oppressed. And I'm going, man, I went from here reading these heroic people, these people who did amazing things, people who overcame extreme odds, people and then you talk about family structure and those things. And now I look and I see, you mentioned it earlier, suddenly there's dysfunction, and a lot of the dysfunction that we're blaming on slavery and early racism why is the gap bigger now than it was in the 60s? Why is the gap bigger now than it was in the 20s? It seems
because that's not the problem.
Help me out. I mean, this victim mentality that's being taught and being pushed, why is that such a major thing right now? Because I'm struggling to understand it. I really, really am struggling to get my mind around what the advantage is to choosing victimhood over choosing being the overcomer. Man, you overcome, you make it, you do it as a people, and you go, wow, look what we overcame. That's the story of people groups throughout history, again and again and again, from the children of Israel to the colonists breaking away to wherever you go around the world, to the William Wallaces, whatever it is, we're going to break through. But now, no, we can't break through. It's perpetual victimhood. Why is that appealing?
Because the people who are pushing this ideology, they're trying to push a radical, transformational Marxist agenda on our society. There's I'm drawing a blank on another book. I think it's Color, Communism, and Common Sense. I believe that's the name of another book written by a former, I wish I had my Kindle handy, written by a former black communist who in around the 60s, he wrote this book. And he spoke about how the practices of pointing out and this is a communist tactic, how they emphasize the evils within any society, and they use those to manipulate and create cultural division. You have your class division, and it's not simply just about the haves and have-nots, the proletariat, the bourgeoisie. It's the people of color, they're marginalized nowadays, and pretty much in all those categories, you have black and brown people, you have your gays, and the whole LGBT movement, your immigrants, Muslims, and then they want to put over here the oppressor, like you were saying, the white Christian, especially male. They're the ones who have been in the position of power, so therefore, everything that they do is racially motivated. Everything that they do is some semblance of trying to maintain or gain power. And it flies in the face of we examine history. If that was truly the case, why would slavery have ended in the first place? Because I always try to remind people that it took a heavy majority or some strong, well-attached people who were influential, white folks primarily, to start speaking up and speaking out against the evils of slavery. Black folks couldn't have done it. We couldn't have done it on our own. It took white folks who cared, white folks predominantly who saw other black people as fellow image bearers, and they understood that man stealing is sin, and that they needed to do something about it, that they needed to make some changes. So all this painting with a broad brush nonsense when it comes down to white people are inherently racist and there's no way they can get around it is trash. It's garbage. And it really drives me nuts and gets me going because, man, let me tell you something. I tell you the comparison. When I was living in New Jersey, and this is just my story, but I could share many others just throughout history, but especially if you check out those books I was pointing out. And there's many other studies that point this out. I dealt with far more racism in New Jersey than I ever did in South Carolina. Not even close. And people just assumed that the South was just racist, just hardcore racist. I don't think I was ever even called the N-word in South Carolina. And I lived there for 4 years. But in a short period of time, I heard that word on a almost daily basis at some points when I was growing up in New Jersey. But it wasn't even close. Am I saying that there was no racism? Of course, I'm not saying that. Am I saying that racism still isn't prevalent in our society today? Of course, we know it is. But is it the biggest issue impacting Black America? I say absolutely not. And there are many other factors that are impacting us. And those people, getting back to what I was stating in the beginning, those folks who are pushing this ideology, they completely overlook or have to distort history because they're trying to basically dismantle many institutions within our society that they hate. Capitalism, our democratic, constitutional republic that we have. They want to do away with all that kind of stuff because they believe in our religious freedoms. They hate, many of them, they hate the full fruit of Christianity, all that goes along with it. They don't want any of that. They don't want anyone telling them what to do, except if they're people that they say, if they say it's okay. Like one of the things I like to point out is the fact that a lot of people, you love telling Christians it's not right to cram your beliefs down our throat. But some of the very same people that would say that are trying to cram their worldview, their perspective. They're trying to make it law. They're trying to make their way of life, their point of view law, and to force us to live and act in a way that's appropriate to them. How is that any different? How is that any different? At the very least, from a Christian perspective, we're mentioning things that are God glorifying, God honoring, things that'll help you to live a whole life. Because the fruit of, when you separate from a biblical perspective, when you start living however you want to live, we are seeing that. We're seeing the fruit of that just through time, through the fatherlessness in the homes, through the STD, sexually transmitted diseases, the crime rate going up. So I can go on and on, the impact when you start living outside of God's righteous standards. And these people don't want to have anything to do with that. Anything that has any type of Judeo-Christian foundation, they want to see that dismantled.
Yeah, and you mentioned that people don't like when we talk about our beliefs as Christians. People say, don't put your beliefs on us, and you can't legislate morality. And honestly, that's something that I hear a lot of Christians say. You can't legislate morality. But the truth be told, all legislation is someone's morality. Every law,
absolutely,
every single law out there is somebody saying, some government saying, this is correct action, this is incorrect action, this is what we approve of, this is what we disapprove of. And so ultimately, whenever we're making those decisions and we talk about legislating morality, someone's morality is going to be legislated. The hope is that it will be ours. The hope is that it will be good Christian morality, or at least good, even just the idea of transcendent moral laws that we all have an understanding of. But someone's morality is going to be legislated. So I always like to point that out whenever we get to that point in conversations, that for the idea that we need to, as believers, just sit back and not try to quote unquote legislate morality. Well, someone said that murder is immoral. Someone said that theft is immoral. Someone said that all of these things are immoral. Someone said, it's immoral to leave your child locked in a car. That's the reason there's a law about that. It's because some things are immoral, and it's okay for the law to declare that. And it's okay for the law to support the enforcement against those that do such things. One of the things that I think would be great to hear from you would be, I had a guy who's actually he's a pastor in the same denomination that I am in. He's an ordained bishop, actually, in the denomination I'm in, but he also spent his career in law enforcement. And one of the things that he says a lot is that the public struggles when they see videos and things like that of law enforcement. And the reason the public struggles is because in order to, enforcing the law, first of all, we know force, right? Police are people that we have given authority as a society to use violence or use force, the force of society, to keep other people in line with the things that we've all agreed upon are the rules of our society. So we take these people and we say, it is your role, your responsibility, and we've obligated you to be the person who takes care of this, to be the person who handles things with force. But the problem with violence, and he pointed this out to me, he said the problem with violence is violence looks violent. And for a lot of people that we're dealing with, it may be things, I think things are changing more and more and more, but there's people that have never been in a playground fight. They've never been, for lack of a better word, they've never been punched in the mouth, and I heard someone say one time, that no man should make decisions until he's been punched in the mouth at least once, right? I know what it is to be on the receiving end of a bad day, and I know what it is to be in those things, and you do too. And like, if that's not, when people have never seen that, never experienced that, never been through that, and then all of a sudden they pull up this video on YouTube, and here's these two people fighting, and this guy's getting punched. They don't understand what violence is because they've never experienced it. Is there anything to his theory, violence looking violent, and that's just the problem that sometimes the public has?
Yeah, violence makes people feel uncomfortable. And a lot of people want to know, they want to believe that there's no need for that. They want to believe that people are inherently good and that there's never a need to beat someone up, slam someone to the ground, handcuff them, shoot them, or even hold them at gunpoint. There are a lot of people who refuse to believe it. They're like some of those folks who will travel over to some of these Islamic dominant nations, especially the ones that are really out of control, because they just want to go and love on the Taliban or go love on ISIS. And then we usually know it doesn't end well for them because you have a lot of people out there. One thing I say in my presentation that I give on police brutality is that I think a lot of times we forget that police work isn't about delivering flowers or serving up scoops of ice cream. You're dealing with the criminal element on a daily basis. And there will come times where you have to use force against someone who is not willing to comply, and you have to make them comply. That's just the reality of it. It's the ugly, unfortunate reality of the job. It doesn't look good. It doesn't feel good when you're on the receiving end of it. And even as a police officer, I didn't, or even as a CO, I didn't enjoy it, but I did what I had to do. You ain't going to hurt me. You're not going to continue to hurt that citizen out there. You're not going to hurt one of my coworkers, especially if there's something I can do about it. It just ain't happening. I always, just personally speaking, I always had a desire to help and to just to be there for people in various ways. I remember some of my friends just coming up to me and talking to me about some of their personal issues, and thinking as a young man, maybe I'll get into psychology. Maybe I'll be a psychologist or something like that. But then as time went on, I just started thinking, man, you know what? I actually like more action and things like that. And so I got into martial arts when I was 16, 17 years old. And that pretty much followed me throughout the course of my life. Joined the Army, was a medic in the Army, again, helping and things like that. And so it was always something I had. So the idea, I don't consider myself a violent man, but I know that if properly provoked, let's put it that way, I can go there. And I have no problem going there. Now, there are times where I've lost my cool as an officer, and man, I felt bad. I always struggle with the reality of, man, I don't want to hide my dirt. I want to come clean. I want to have a clean conscience before my Lord, and just with my supervisors and things like that. So I would go up and I would say, hey, you know what, Sarge, I screwed up on this. And then we deal with it. He's like, right up what went down and break it down. So I think a lot of times people just look at cops like we're a bunch of thugs and a bunch of gangsters and who just want to go out there and just jack folks up. Are there cops like that? No doubt. I've came across them on too many occasions. Too many meaning any, because it shouldn't be out there. It shouldn't be a part of police culture. But once again, having a true, proper understanding of human nature, you understand that we have a sin nature, and that we will rebel against God, and we'll rebel against our own conscience. So, but the general public hates crime, they hate violence, and they shouldn't have to see it. And it's unfortunate that they have to see it. But we also have to understand that it is a natural part of this fallen world that we're living in, and that there are people who are, and we need to be understanding of those folks who are willing to step into the fray, so to speak, and who are willing to run towards the gunfire as opposed to running the opposite direction, like any sane person would do with common sense. Run away. But the police officer's job is to go towards the threat, because the threat has to be neutralized. And like I said, it's uncomfortable, but I think, and then we also have to deal with the fact that a lot of social media in our current culture, YouTube, Google, they try, in Facebook, Instagram, they try to keep people from seeing that stuff. And I think that also desensitizes folks from that unfortunate reality. The less you see of it, when you do see it, it's shocking. And it's scary, and it's heartbreaking. But we also have to understand that there's context. Context needs to go along with those shocking and scary videos.
We fail to get the context. We fail to get the context of the situation and know what's happening, know what all went on. You talk about those de-escalation moments. I also find it interesting that there's always somebody online, and I know you've seen this a million times. There's always somebody online, or maybe even on camera, or holding the camera, that's like, well, they didn't have to do that, or they didn't have to hit him, or they didn't. And so I want to ask, well, what should they have done?
Right. You know, the thing that gets me, man, when we talk about these videos, we typically see, going back to what I said about context, we typically see, oh, the officer just punching some dude in the face. I think there was a recent video out of Washington, D.C., where a cop was punching some dude in the face. Multiple cops standing around the guy. The guy's handcuffed, or at least they have his arms behind his back. And then come to find out he still was in possession of a gun. Somehow he still had a gun, and I think he might have been reaching for it. So the officers were throwing shots. If I have all the context properly remembered. So the officer was throwing shots at him to keep him from pulling out any weapon. So this guy, but the video went all over the internet, over 1 million views, people sharing it left and right. Look at these cops just beating this black man up. See, that's what they do. That's why we can't trust them. That's why they need to be defunded. And it was a couple of days later, they pulled out, or a day later, they pulled out the body cam more body cam footage, and come to find out that this suspect was in possession of a gun, and I think he was reaching for it. And then when you start talking about tactics, oh my gosh, bro, I could talk all day. It drives me nuts because the average person has no clue of what to deal with. They have no clue about situational awareness. They have no clue about threat perception, none whatsoever. And how do I know that? Because I listen to them talk. They're saying, oh, why did this officer have to take this guy to? Well, he was resisting, and there's more going on, and he was reaching for this officer's gun, or he was in possession of a weapon, or they needed to de-escalate it quickly because vehicles were coming. There could be so many factors involved. Before I went out to patrol, went out to the streets, I had situational awareness to a degree from working in the corrections environment. Actually, I had a pretty high amount compared to the average citizen. But then when you go out to the streets and you're going into someone else's home, or you're at a bar, or you're on the road somewhere, side of the road somewhere at 2:00 in the morning, and you're conducting a car stop on a vehicle that's stolen, you don't know what's going on with that individual. You don't know their mindset. You don't know if he's like, man, I'm an ex-felon and I got a gun in my car and I'm not going back to prison. You don't know their mindset. So you have to approach all these situations with your radar up and being alert as possible, enough to where if things start looking ugly and jump off, you can respond appropriately. And I go back to the average citizen receiving none of that training, but yet are quick to want to tell a cop what he should or should not have done. It's ridiculous. Like LeBron James with the Ma'Khia Bryant shooting, with her with the knife. Oh, they shouldn't have shot him. Like what? Okay, so I can only imagine.
That was my favorite. That was my favorite comment that I kept hearing. Why didn't they tase her? Like that one, I was like, my goodness, do you understand at all what happens when somebody gets tased? Do you understand at all that she's got that knife? And I actually posted something then and got a little bit of heat, but I said, if my daughter got shot while she was attempting to stab someone, I would apologize to the police officer for the trauma that she brought into his life. And I stand by that.
You and me both, man. If one of my kids got shot because a cop came up on the scene and they were coming after two people with knives in their hands and they got shot, I ain't gonna be mad at the cop. You put your actions, brought the police there. Your actions put you in a situation to where the cops had to use deadly force against you. Period. Had that conversation with my kids. They understood exactly where I was coming from. They understood what she did was ignorant. And anyone speaking out against that, you're dumb. So I can only imagine, had they not shot that girl, but they allowed her to stab the other girls, they'd have been pissed off about that. They'd have been complaining about that. They would have been mad about that. Oh, look at them. They don't care about us. Look at them just letting us get stabbed over there. There's no way that officer could have won unless he ran over there and wrestled her down to the ground. Then they might have been happy, but then he's going to put himself in harm's way. He's going to expose himself to someone who's in possession of a knife. This ain't Kung Fu theater, folks. You don't pull out another, or the old Beat It video, Michael Jackson. One person pulls out a knife, you pull out another one. You guys have a knife fight to see who's going to win. They bring a certain amount of force. You bring a greater amount of force to bring them down to control, to a point to where you can control them. So if you bring a knife, that officer pulled out a taser. You're talking about two prongs that have to fly out, and they have to hit properly in a volatile environment, volatile situation. Those prongs have to hit just right. And if he misses, what does he have to do? power off his taser, pull that cartridge down, reach down, grab another cartridge, if he has one on him, load it back up, and then attempt to deploy another taser shot. So you're talking at minimum 5 seconds. What can you do with a knife in your hand with 5 seconds? How many times can you stab somebody with a knife in 5 seconds? 10, 15 jabs? All you need is one to puncture a major artery. Game over. People need to start thinking. This is what really drives me nuts. So that's one of the main reasons why I use my knowledge, my skills as a former CO, as a former cop, as a defensive tactics instructor, firearms instructor, police tactical instructor in general, with all the different hats I wore, crisis intervention team. That's why I try to use the skills, the knowledge that I gained over an over 20-year law enforcement career, not to mention my military training, to bring to these arguments, to bring to these discussions, to try to get people to start seeing things a little bit differently. Not everything is black and white, y'all. There's a lot of gray involved in police work. We used to hear that over and over again. When we were going through training, when we were in the police academy, we would ask simple black and white questions. So if an officer is in this situation, would he be okay to do this? And oftentimes the answer they would give us was, it depends. One little variable can impact what an officer does. One little situation. My response on a call could be completely different than a 5'2", 115-pound female officer. Totally different. I'm 6'2", about 235. Pretty good shape. Been doing martial arts most of my life. And I'm a good shot. So how I respond on a call on the same situation could be completely different depending on the skill set, strength, size, physical fitness, all those different things of another officer. Completely different. Same exact call. But the average citizen doesn't consider that. And I don't mind them asking questions. I encourage people to ask questions. There's nothing wrong with that. But once they start stepping outside of their knowledge base and they start dictating or assuming what the officer should have done or shouldn't have done, you're stepping into dangerous territory.
Yeah, I've thought when seeing some of your work, some of your videos, I've thought it would be good to have a series. I need to do a spinoff series with you where we going through those videos. I've seen you do a couple of them. I think one of the other things that is a struggle right now, and I think it's a good thing about people like you, we're having a real issue with finding any real integrity in these conversations. And what I mean by that is it's either they're all good, every police shooting, every police action is good, or every police shooting, every police action is bad. And there's nobody that's saying, or there are, but it's just the loudest voices are not saying, no, some things are good and some things are bad. Sometimes things are justified. You know, here in South Carolina, we had the guy running, get shot in the back. Then the police officer plants the taser, I think it was.
I remember.
That's obviously wrong. And he went to prison, as he should have, right? That one makes sense, you know? At the same time, when we're out here treating every single event, every single thing, and I don't want to go through them all, but I mean, there are some times where I go, okay, not everything was racial and not everything necessarily was wrong. You take the Michael Brown shooting a few years back. That one was one. It is my understanding that at some point he had his hand on that officer's gun, which is why it jammed after the first shot. That is my understanding of that shooting. If that officer's in his vehicle, he fires a shot while he's in his vehicle, he gets out of his vehicle and then has to clear the jam while dealing with this young man. It is a tragic thing, but I'm wondering what in the world is happening that your hand was on his gun. There's a problem there. And I think, we could go down that list again and again and again where we see things where we go, hey, this was obviously wrong, but not everything is. Georgia recently, it's not been talked about a lot, but in Atlanta, those two police officers, it's my understanding, have been reinstated in Atlanta with the shooting with the man at the Wendy's. Who
I
was
think I heard something along those. Rayshard Brooks shooting.
I think was at the Wendy's parking lot with the with the taser, and so situations like that. Again, everybody's dissecting it, but there's a lot happening. Someone just, they literally just fought with the police. Now they've got a weapon. You're chasing this guy. You know he's been fighting you, and I'm not a police officer. This is my perspective, and then I'll let you. We'll just talk about that one. He's been struggling with me and my partner. We've already, it's my understanding, tried to give him a little bit of an opportunity to find a way home, that sort of thing. That wasn't working out. Then we start talking to him. We end up in a struggle. Things escalated very quickly. It went from very calm to, and most people don't get that. Most of the people that are out in the public that ever have to get in a physical altercation, you had all day to get mad about it. You got stirred up, you and this person screaming, yelling. When you're a police officer, you never know when they're going to hit the gas on something. And that's what happens here. It suddenly escalates and they're struggling. He's fighting with both of these police officers. If I'm one of those officers and he's been struggling with both me and my partner, I don't know what he's gotten from the other guy. I don't know what he's been able to take off of him. I don't know what he's carrying. And then as I'm chasing him, he turns and points. And anybody that's, if you've watched the videos, you've been around it. I don't know. I mean, I obviously know I do a lot of shooting and that sort of thing. I know what a gun sounds like, but I don't know what a gun sounds like when I just got done fighting somebody and I'm chasing them and they point something that looks just like a gun at me and I hear a bang or a pop or whatever. I don't know what that is. So the idea that he shot, I don't even know that he knew the guy had a taser. I just know that he pointed something at him and it made a pop noise. It made a bang noise. And if you've watched these videos.
And there's a flash.
Yeah, flash, all those things. I have heard people get tased and it sounded like somebody got shot. I've heard people get shot and I thought they got tased. In that moment, who knows what's going on through that guy's head? But the idea that now we're going to just look at that and say that's patently wrong. How can we? That's obviously not the case. I mean, there's no charges, none of those things. But I think that's the struggle for me, and I think that would be something where if I could encourage you to continue in that work, because we need people who will look and say, yeah, that was wrong. But yeah, this wasn't. Or yeah, look at it this way. But it seems like, again, nobody's really doing that middle of the road work. Everybody's just, everything that happens is wrong. So when you have, you mentioned before the Shaquille O'Neal, who now is consulting for police departments everywhere, apparently. When he say, or not Shaquille O'Neal, I said Shaquille, I'm sorry, James. Not Shaquille, LeBron James, yeah. Shaquille O'Neal, another Laker, a great Laker, who actually was in law enforcement, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
right?
He's actually pretty pro-police.
Yeah. I got that so mixed up. Yeah. I'm sorry. Shaquille O'Neal's never going to hear this, but I'm going to have to edit this out of the audio version. So Shaquille, I think he was doing like some reserve work and things like that. So yeah, he's a pro-police guy, not Shaq. Wow, I feel bad now. I feel like I've shamed my entire childhood.
We've been talking a while. We all get it. We all get our thoughts mixed up, man.
Yeah,
as a fellow creator, as a fellow content creator, I feel your pain, bro.
Man.
I understand.
Yeah, my whole Shaquille O'Neal, Shaq attack from back in the day as a kid. Like, this guy's breaking glass backboards, and now. Oh yeah, now I've mixed him up with LeBron James. I really am disappointed in myself. That being said, yeah, LeBron coming out and saying, with the girl in Ohio, tragic that she died, but LeBron making that statement at that point, you're just saying everything the police do is wrong, and so that's what you're speaking into.
When it's all said and done, man. And I encourage people to check out my content. Obviously, I'm a little biased because it's my content. But I think that if you examine my breakdown of a lot of these different police situations, these shootings, uses of force, you'll see a pretty fair, balanced approach. You'll see me quick to criticize a cop when he does something stupid, but you'll also see me I'll say, you know what, that was good. And I go against there are a lot of officers who disagree with me. Some people say you shouldn't criticize cops in public. I think that's just silly. Some people say, well, people don't need to hear all this. You should just support the police regardless. And I think that's just dumb, because as a law enforcement, we can't do, I'm retired law enforcement. They can't do whatever they want to do. They just can't and try to justify it because, well, this guy was a criminal and I was not everything is covered in. I feared for my life. that doesn't justify you doing whatever you want to do. There's still standards. There's still rules. There are still laws. There's still Graham versus Connor. There's still Tennessee versus Garner. Those are laws that kind of put barriers and limits and dictate when an officer can use force, to what degree, whether it's a fleeing felon or low levels of force or deadly force. Graham versus Connor, Tennessee versus Garner. Those are good laws to do some research on. And if you're concerned at all about the topic of police force, police use of force, you want to deeply familiarize yourself with those case laws in particular. But when we talk about the Michael Brown case, the Rayshard Brooks, Ma'Khia Bryant, Stephen Clark, we can go on and on. When we talk about these cases, these police contacts, I tell people over and over and over again, you would dramatically decrease the number of police shootings if these individuals would have simply complied to the police officer's orders. Stephen Clark would still be alive. Rayshard Brooks, Jacob Blake wouldn't have gotten shot. I mean, you pretty much name it. Who else did I mention? Stephen Clark. All these guys, Michael Brown, these guys would still be alive had they just done what they were told to do. They would still be alive today. George Floyd, even, as controversial as it is for me to say that, had he done what the officer told him and not panicking and freaking out and probably and under the influence, I would dare say 99% certain that he would have been alive today, right now. Compliance is so vitally important, and I cannot say it enough. If you come in contact with the police, let's look at the FBI, not the FBI, let's look at the Washington Post police use of force data. They determined in their first year of tracking police shootings, they determined that over 85% of all police shootings involved a suspect in possession of a gun or some other weapon. Over 85. So you have 185%. So you have 100 police shootings, 85, and I think that was just a gun stat. I think those were just gun stats off the top of my head. But I do know that the percentage was extremely high, and the vast majority of police use of force, in particularly police shootings, the suspect was in possession of a gun or some other form of a weapon. People need to understand. These are just factors that people just truly need to understand. And once again, going back to how it makes people feel uncomfortable. You don't like it. And also you have the other side of it. People are trying to make it seem, oh, you're just trying to get people to be subservient. No, I want to save lives. No, I don't want people to end up dead just because they feel like they want to run from the cops or they want to get into a fight with a police officer. Just do what you're told. If you feel like your rights have been violated, there are things that you can do in order to protect yourself. Gather that police officer's information, get his name, get the location of the stop, get his vehicle number, get his ID or badge number, get his description, time of the call, all that kind of stuff. And then you turn around, you comply, you do what you're told, and then you live to fight another day. You fight your battles, not on the side of the road, you fight it in the courtroom where you have a better chance of winning. You have more and more law enforcement agencies, more and more cops wearing body cameras, more vehicles with dash cameras. So if that cop did violate your rights, you have more opportunities to share and demonstrate that and make your case. But if you do something stupid, fight, run, take off, you are putting your livelihood, your life in someone else's hands. Is that what you want to do? I really want that to stick. I want that message to get into these people's heads, young and old. And all those people out there are telling people to do whatever. You don't have to comply or listen to a cop. You want more dead people on the streets? You want to see this happen more and more? Keep with that stupid message. People need to learn to understand that they need to come to an understanding that compliance saves more lives and that a cop's actions are primarily dictated by the suspect's actions. If that suspect is behaving and doing what they're told, then the cop typically over 99% of the time nothing's going to happen to them. Nothing's going to happen to them. Once they decide they want to take it into, they want to escalate things. They want to run. They want to fight. They want to pull out a weapon or put their hands in their pockets when that cop doesn't know what he has in possession of his pockets, or refuse to take your hands out of your pockets when given verbal commands. You don't care about your life, and you are giving your personal safety, your well-being in the hands of someone else who doesn't know your intentions. So think about these things before you start to act, or you start giving out advice, or you assume that the cop should have done XYZ in this call because that's just how I feel. Man, your feelings don't matter based on a potentially life or death situation. I would encourage anyone out there, whether you're pro-police, you're in the middle, or you can't stand them, to do multiple, not a ride-along, multiple ride-alongs with your local police agency. And if they offer a citizens police academy, jump in, because the knowledge that you will learn, that you will gain as a result of that, going through that training, will do you a world of good and will open up it will open your eyes so wide to a world that most people are completely oblivious to. And make sure you check out Code Red Conversations. Check out my YouTube content where I help break down some of these situations, because I go into pretty good detail as to why the officer did what he did, why I believe they did what they did, why they did what they did, and I give my perspective of whether it was justified or not.
Speaking of that, Code Red Conversations, tell me about that. Eric, we've been talking a while, man. We've had a good conversation today. This has been
good.
Man,
good stuff.
Tell me about Code Red Conversations. What made you start it, and what is Code Red Conversations?
You know what made me start it? The thing that really pushed it over the edge was in 2015, I believe it was. I could be 2016. I can't remember what year it was, when the Dallas shooting, where those five cops got shot in Dallas during the BLM protests, or there was a BLM march and those police officers got gunned down. It was that year. I was in Dallas. I was about a block away from the shooting, sitting at a restaurant, enjoying some Italian spaghetti restaurant, enjoying some Italian food. And we see all this commotion going on down the street. We saw the protesters marching. They were calm, peaceful, no problem. And then one of the people at the restaurant turned on the TV, and we saw that there was a shooting going on, maybe, like I said, 2 blocks at the most down the road from where we were. And I got my family. I said, let's get out of here before they block off this whole area and we will never be able to get to our hotel. So I pretty much stayed up all night watching the news, interacting with people on Facebook, because so many people had opinions, people blaming the cops. Well, the cops weren't just indiscriminately shooting black men. This black man wouldn't have felt the need to do what he did. And I'm debating and having conversations. And there was a radio show, and they're currently on the air, but it's a show called Airing the Addisons. It's a black couple who are black conservative Christian couple who speak out on the cultural issues. And I was commenting on these different topics, and I remember posting, I really wish I can get people to understand my perspective based on my training, based on the knowledge I picked up over the years. I really wish I can get people to understand my perspective. And so the wife sent me, Mickey Addison is her name, awesome lady, by the way, Will, her husband. Check out their show, awesome content. She sent me a message asking me to come on her show. And here I was kind of a little oblivious because I stayed up so late. I thought it was Friday night and I thought they wanted me to come on Monday. But she was like, no, I want you to come on like in an hour, because the show started like 5 p.m., like 5 a.m. Central or something like that. So, okay, so I jump up and I start gathering some material together. And then I had opportunities where I just started speaking and started just trying to inform people about Graham versus Connor, about situational awareness, about police tactics, all these different things. I just started talking and people called in the show, and then then she suggested me I go on another show where I followed up and we talked more about these topics. And then I just found more people wanting me to come on and speak up on these issues. And it was such a burning passion of mine to help people better understand policing. And in 2018, I just said, you know what, let me start making some content consistently and start sharing my thoughts when it comes down to all these matters, helping the general public get a better understanding of law enforcement. So I created a YouTube channel, which was a journey in and of itself, becoming a YouTube creator. Editing, I didn't have any background in anything like that, anything creative on that level. So it was everything I had to, it was a struggle, it was a battle to learn how to edit and shoot videos and try to create content that's engaging and interesting. So, and it was a lot of hit or miss, and, you know, I'd lose a little momentum and kind of pick it back up. But man, I'm telling you, it has been an incredible journey. The opportunities that the Lord has opened up for me to speak Chicago and in Tennessee and the travel. I'll be going to Atlanta here in a couple of weeks. Just so many opportunities locally here in Las Vegas to be able to speak at schools and churches, various community groups. The opportunities have been so tremendous. My heart's desire is to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the average everyday citizen, to create a better understanding of police tactics. And also from a perspective, because during my career, I was always an advocate of police officers being better prepared, better trained. I used to push so many different issues. And by God's grace, I was able to enact some change on my department, especially from the correction side of the house, to give officers better training, help them have more greater skill set so they can put on their tool belt, so they're better prepared in the public sector when COs would be transporting inmates into the various hospitals or different courts in case something went down, increase their skills. And then I was just trying to advocate for greater physical fitness, higher standards in defensive tactics for cops. So I just want to see people gain more knowledge. I want the public to have more knowledge about the police, have a better understanding of a police use of force. And I want to see cops improve and be the best that they can be, improve their situational awareness skills, improve their physical fitness, improve their defensive tactics skills, become better at de-escalating. So everyone is better as a result. And so, man, that's my passion. That's my drive. That's my heart. And yeah, that's what I do, man. Code Red Conversations. It's a lot of doors have been opened up as a result of me starting this journey.
Absolutely, man. Code Red Conversations. So much great stuff going on there. A lot of great content. I want to see more of those. I want to see more of those breakdown videos. And I don't know, man. Maybe I may have to get with you and we'll do a collab on some of that or something. But
I'm down, man. Like I said, real quick, man. Don't forget your thought. Just over the last few weeks, it's been a little dry, man. My mom passed the end of July, and just everything that went as a result of that, I kind of slowed down on creating content. But yeah, I've been getting moving back in the right direction to kind of get things started up again. So I haven't abandoned it. Those of you out there who are familiar with me, I'll be having some content in the next few days. So hang with me. But yeah, the passion is still there, man. I just had to change my priorities a bit over the last few weeks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Eric, obviously sorry to hear about your mom. And I know that actually delayed our recording a little bit. And man, so many things that folks need to hear from you. So they can follow you on YouTube. They can go to YouTube and find Code Red Conversations. Where else can they follow you on social media?
They can follow me on Facebook. You can follow me, Eric L. Muldrow, on Facebook, and also my Code Red Conversations channel there, and on Instagram. And then you can go to www.coderedconversations.com, and you'll have a little bit more of a breakdown, different places, different podcasts I've done, different interview shows I've been on. And if you want to reach out to me as far as me perhaps doing a webinar or coming out to speak, you have all the ways of getting a hold of me down at the bottom of the page. And if you really want to support what I'm doing, I have my merchandise page. You can pick up a Code Red Conversations t-shirt, and I have a hat. I have a couple of other items out there that might pique your interest, because all this, as you know, Patrick, this ain't free. Doing this kind of stuff is not always cheap, being a content creator. So if any way that people can support what it is that we're trying to do, I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. But yeah, come check out my website and you get to see little clips of me speaking and doing different things. But I'm primarily on the main ones. I don't do Twitter. Twitter is just a headache over there. But Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and my own website. Come check me out.
Absolutely. And, Eric, we had a great conversation today. Lots of stuff we've talked about. I feel like we could go hours more. So many more things we could talk about. But you got stuff to do. You got a life to lead over there. I appreciate you taking some time for us today, Eric. Thank you, Eric from Code Red Conversations. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that today has been more than a conversation for you. Thanks again for being part of More Than a Conversation today. If you'd like more content like this, check out my blog at www.pastorconley.com. That's PastorConley.com. Again, that's PastorConley.com. I'd also love to see you join us in worship at Garden Sanctuary. If you're ever in Rock Hill, South Carolina, or the greater Charlotte area, we'd love to have you stop by and worship with us. Check us out at www.gardensanctuary.org. That's gardensanctuary.org. Until next time, I hope this has been more than a conversation.